Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following. Ministry paper number 34 of 2019 entitled Summary Economic and Social Survey 2018 and the Economic and Social Survey 2019.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motion given orally, questions and answers to questions.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. At the elapse of 21 days, by your leave, I wish to ask the Minister in charge of Education the following question.
The leader of government business had made a request. Not you. That request can only be granted on the basis that there's a suspension of all the orders and then you proceed. Or we go through them without anybody responding.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I indicated to you that as is customary, the clerk of the House, who has the responsibility for laying the matter on the table of the House, which does not attract a debate of any kind, unless it is intended to be debated by the Minister, with the portfolio responsibility for finance.
Mr. Semuda, will you move that we suspend the standing orders?
No, you don't. You go through the items.
We go to.
Is to be laid on the table of the House for future debate. It attracts no commentary.
So,
Minister. Yes, sir. Answers to questions. What? No, that you recommend?
Members.
Mr. Speaker.
Members. Members, I'm suspending the other items on the standing orders and I'm going to public business. We'll return to them at a later stage in today's operation. Public business. Mr. Semuda.
Mr. Speaker, I here to intervene. The practice that we've been following over the past during the sexual debate, as the House Leader indicated, you go through the agenda items, and at public business, we take public business. Then we commit the other items. It's not to suspend standing order, because there's no reason for the suspension of standing order. Secondly, you just stated that you are suspending standing order. But someone has to move for the suspension, the House Leader has to move for the suspension of standing order. Then you ask the House, those in favor, those against. But not the Speaker says I'm suspending. That's not the protocol, that's not the way it's done.
Mr. Warmington, my understanding the leader of government business makes a request that we move to the public business and that the Attorney General will speak. And I said that we would go through the order without proceeding on them. So what is the problem? I am going through the orders, and the leader of government is getting upset about it.
But that didn't go through the agenda. You didn't go through the agenda. You say you're suspending the agenda. Let us hear the Attorney General. No, it doesn't hear yet. It's proceeding right there.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead, Mr. Samuel.
We cannot have several speakers. We cannot have several speakers at the same time.
Order, please.
We cannot have several speakers at the same time, nor can we have several leaders of government business at the same time. I am therefore advising you, Mr. Speaker, that it is a wish, I would like you to proceed to public business, at which time the Attorney General will make her contribution to the sectoral debate. If it is the wish of the House for us to recommit other matters, we will so request by asking your permission to do that.
Mr. I have been advised that we go through the order and go to the item you request. And so I am going to take this opportunity by saying we'll do public business and then the Attorney General, you may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, may I be permitted to speak from a seat other than the one assigned to me? Yes. Mr. Speaker, with the Office of Attorney General now in such sharp focus, not only here in Jamaica, but also in other common law jurisdictions, including those of our closest neighbors to the north, I should like to begin by highlighting that our current arrangements need to be revisited. The recommendations of the 2011 Commission of Inquiry that were acted upon by the government resulted in the Attorney General's Department and the Ministry of Justice being headed by different people, and the Attorney General no longer being a minister, nor necessarily a member of the Senate or of the House of Representatives, in accordance with Section 79 of the Constitution. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General attends meetings of the Cabinet at the invitation of the Prime Minister. As well-intentioned as those recommendations of the 2011 Commission of Inquiry were, no guidance was given nor sought as to how to effectively implement them. Mr. Speaker, the pages of our constitutional history provide us with necessary guidance and important context for due consideration. In the constitutional law of Jamaica, we're told that historically, the Attorney General has been an important officer of the government. Under the Crown Colony system, in addition to being the principal legal officer of the Crown, he was an ex officio member of the Legislative Council and an important executive officer. He retained his position when the constitutional system was reformed in 1944 and continued as a member of the policy-making Executive Council until 1957, when the Council of Ministers was established, a position which he occupied until the method of constituting the Legislative Council was drastically altered in the Constitution granting internal self-government in 1959. We're further told, Mr. Speaker, that when the Independence Constitution was being drafted, the question of the manner of the appointment of the Attorney General and what functions should be entrusted to him were extensively discussed. One view was that the administration of justice was a fundamental part of the business of government, and the government should therefore have full control and responsibility for such a matter. It was further urged that it would be undesirable for a civil servant to have control of a subject which might have important political repercussions, since he would be immune from criticisms and free from personal responsibility to answer for the exercise of his powers. This explains, Mr. Speaker, why the framers of the Constitution, in their wisdom, deliberately changed the office from being a public office. The other view was that it was dangerous in a small country like Jamaica, where political tensions are sometimes high and feelings of partisanship strong, to have a politically appointed Attorney General possessing all the powers usually attached to the post. It was also argued that those functions had previously been exercised by a public officer without apparent difficulties. Mr. Speaker, the result was the not unusual compromise of providing for a politically appointed Attorney General who should not be responsible for the administration of the criminal law. It was decided that, that he be the principal legal advisor to the government of Jamaica, and this is stipulated in Section 79(1) of the Constitution of Jamaica. While at the same time, responsibility for the control of criminal proceedings should be vested in a Director of Public Prosecutions who would be a public officer. Mr. Speaker, Section 94 of the Constitution provides for the establishment of the public office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. And this also explains why the framers of the Constitution, in their wisdom, deliberately divested the Attorney General of the powers to initiate, take over, or discontinue criminal proceedings. Under Section 79, subsection 2 of the Constitution, power to appoint and remove the hold of the office of Attorney General is exercisable by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister, and I think we all know this. The Attorney General is not now an ex officio member of the Cabinet and can only be appointed a minister like any other minister in accordance with the constitutional provisions for ministerial appointment at sections 70 and 71. Mr. Speaker, in strict law, the Attorney General was not required to possess any professional or academic qualification when the office was a public office. Quite interesting. It was upon the first political appointment that the bar was set high, that no one could hold the office, hold or act in the office who was not qualified for appointment as a judge of the Supreme Court of Jamaica. Interestingly, as part of the Independence Constitution reform, the Attorney General was not required to be a member of either House of Parliament. Notwithstanding, Mr. Speaker, the considered views of the framers of the Constitution were that if the Attorney General happens to be a member of the House of Representatives, he could be made a minister and might be entrusted with a portfolio. If he's not a member of the House of Representatives and his presence in Cabinet is thought desirable, then he could be appointed to the Senate and made a minister without portfolio. Even more interesting, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that the recorded pages of our constitutional history tell us of the anomalous position that resulted when the new was designated Minister of Legal Affairs as well as Attorney General. From there on, the practice developed where the Attorney General was also appointed Minister with a portfolio of legal affairs or justice. As a side issue, Mr. Speaker, and members may find this interesting, the position of Minister without portfolio evolved for members of the Senate to become members of Cabinet without legal charge of departments or subjects. It was the 1967 Jamaica Labour Party government that introduced a new feature into the Cabinet structure by creating 2 new posts of Minister of States. Details may be found in Ministry Paper number 9 of 1967. The 2 appointees were in fact made from among government senators and were attached to ministries headed by ministers appointed under Section 70 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution makes no specific provisions for this type of status, and the appointment is merely regarded as an administrative arrangement, as such appointees are legally ministers without portfolio. In 1972, the People's National Party government adopted this JLP innovation, so say the history books, but in 1975 passed the Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries Constitutional Amendment Act, which permitted a limited number of senators to be appointed ministers without portfolio. Mr. Speaker, this brief historical constitutional context provides answers to some of the recently posed questions and explains why the Attorney General may be appointed from the Houses of Parliament. It also sheds important light on the status of the office as a cabinet-level office. The office was not designed to be a department of another ministry. Instead, it was meant to be an office of high constitutional import in its own right with responsibility for its own establishment. On this note, Mr. Speaker, permit me to thank the leader of government business in this Honourable House for the opportunity to once again make this presentation independently of the Minister of Justice, who is beside me for support. Against this backdrop, and in the light of the steps being taken in the process to re-centralize legal services under the Office of the Attorney General, I ask, Mr. Speaker, for a re-examination of the constitutional provisions and the conventions surrounding the Office of Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, you may recall that when I spoke last year, I informed this Honourable House that in April 2018, we launched the Centralization of Legal Services project. I then briefly mentioned some of the benefits to be gained and the primary objective of improvement in the quality of legal services across the public sector. Just over a year later, significant strides have been made in advancing the process. The core project team is now in place and is working to ensure that the project objectives are achieved and that key stakeholders are consulted and remain engaged. A transition period was introduced on April 1, 2019, with the chambers being designated headquarters and given administrative oversight for legal service units, what we now call LSUs, in ministries. LSUs, Mr. Speaker, are now submitting monthly reports to headquarters, and meetings involving the LSU and headquarters have increased. Training in technical core competencies for legal officers began in September 2018, and to date, we have had more than 15 training interventions focused on building capacity in key areas of the law, including legislative process, basic elements of public law, preparation of legislative cabinet submissions and drafting instructions, processing of personal injury and motor vehicle accident claims. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of the centralization of legal services has been a team effort, and many of the team members are here. Many divisions of the chambers have provided support in the implementation process by conducting training on various areas of the law, procedure and practices of the government for members of the legal service units, as well as policy officers of the ministries, departments and agencies of government. Training has included exposure not just to areas of law, but also to areas that intersect with policy, as well as exposure to administrative matters such as the machineries of a legal registry. Special recognition, Mr. Speaker, must be given to the General Legal Affairs and Constitutional and Legislative Affairs Division of the Chambers. Training has been supported by the creation of a legal practice handbook and the expansion of the online law research facility to headquarters and the LSUs. The transformation of business processes is happening alongside improvements in the ICT infrastructure. Microsoft Office 365 has been rolled out in the chambers as well as in the legal service units. We have upgraded our Wi-Fi and expanded bandwidth and are purchasing several new pieces of equipment. An organizational development specialist has been engaged and work has begun in assessing the workload and work processes in order to develop a new organizational structure to support centralization. Mr. Speaker, we have achieved much, and the hard-working men and women of the chambers and the LSUs have exhibited a high level of understanding and patience as we wade through the waters of change. Mr. Speaker, permit me to use this opportunity to thank the transition project team headed by Mrs. Kayla Sewell-Mills, who has provided invaluable support in getting us to this stage. And Ms. Mills is in the gallery. I'm also very grateful to our international partners, the World Bank, who along with the Ministry of Finance have ensured funding for our modernization initiative. And I know the former Minister of Justice takes an interest since the work began under his watch. My appreciation also extends to former Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Justice, Mrs. Carol Palmer, now Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Energy. Our current Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Sansia Bennett-Templer, who along with the Cabinet Secretary, Ambassador the Honorable Douglas Saunders, continue to lend unwavering support. Mr. Speaker, before reporting on the work of the 6 divisions of the chambers, I should like to invite this Honourable House to note that the idea of government has changed over the decades since independence. If you ask the man in the street when a fire burns at a fire dump, who is responsible? Who is liable for resulting harm? In the main, the response will be that government is. But, Mr. Speaker, we have to ask whether it is truly so, and really from a technical perspective. The Constitution, in referencing public service, public officers, and public office, appear to contemplate central government and not the wider public service, as the concept of an executive agency was only legislated in 2001. With the development of overrun of a number of entities comprising the wider public service, it has been necessary, Mr. Speaker, to partially address the issue by amendments to the Financial Administration and Audit Act of 1959 and to develop rules relating to public bodies and later to enact the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act of 2001. Mr. Speaker, the Office of Attorney General provides a unique vantage point as well as a bird's eye view into how government is run and how it operates. Over the past 3.5+ years since my appointment to the office, I have taken the time to better understand how the various ministries, departments, and agencies work. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I find it ironic that some people seem to think that Government of Jamaica means the political directorate, instead of all of government, which includes the 3 interrelated branches of government, plus the civil service and the wider public service. It is all of government that is tasked with discharging the functions of government in the service of the people, and it is the Government of Jamaica that we advise. I now turn, Mr. Speaker, to the work of the divisions of the chambers. Speaking firstly of the Litigation Division. Mr. Speaker, I have worked very closely with the Litigation Division since my appointment as Attorney General. Perhaps it is because of my continued love for the courtroom and the fact that there is where I began to practice law when I was recruited to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions almost a quarter of a century ago when I graduated from law school. Perhaps it is also because I served as a judge of the parish courts in all of its jurisdictions for almost a decade before coming into politics. Mr. Speaker, I want to put on record my profound gratitude for the work being done by the litigation team. The current load is heavy, and the resources are nowhere near sufficient to allow them to perform optimally. Yet, every single day, they show up at court and successfully represent the people's interests in a wide range of cases. In the process, Mr. Speaker, they often endure insults and have frequently reported to me the hostile treatment sometimes meted out to them in the courtroom. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I gained a better appreciation of their reports when I had my own experience in the famous NIDS case in October of last year. Incidentally, Mr. Speaker, incidentally, as Attorney General, I have personally represented the government with high success. High success rate, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
If you may say so yourself.
Even if I may say so myself, but the records are there to show. One case doesn't make you a loser. Before the Judicial Committee of Her Majesty's Privy Council, in cases of exceptional public importance, for reasons including the extremely heavy workload of the chambers, I have had to step into the arena where necessary and as appropriate to help to do the work, not just review and sign off on what is done by the team of attorneys. Mr. Speaker, I should now like to highlight some of the work that was done by the division through the cases. Altec Inc. and James Hogan. In this case, the Court of Appeal considered, among other issues, the issue of the constitutionality of Rule 12.13 and Rule 16.22 of the Civil Procedure Rules. Rule 12.13 bars a defendant against whom a default judgment has been entered from being heard on the issue of the quantum of damages and restricts his right of audience to the issue of costs. Rule 16.2 provides for the registry to give notice of assessment of damages to the claimant only. Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General was not a party to the claim, but was made an interested party by the court's invitation, where we made submissions on the constitutional issue. The background to the case was that the respondents had obtained a default judgment against the appellant, damages had been assessed, and the respondents had proceeded to execute the judgment. The court held that Rule 12.13 of the CPR is unconstitutional insofar as it purports to limit the participation of a defendant against whom a default judgment has been entered in an assessment of damages hearing to the issue of cost. In coming to the conclusion, it affirmed an earlier decision. The court also held that the other rule, 16.22, is unconstitutional to the extent that it provides for notice of the assessment of damages to be given to the claimant only. These are interesting developments in the jurisprudence of the jurisdiction. Mr. Speaker, there is the case of Jamaica for Justice and the Police Services Commission. Jamaica for Justice, the appellant in the case, having received numerous complaints implicating former Superintendent Hewitt in allegations of misconduct, remitted those allegations to the Police Service Commission for consideration. After relying on the Commission of Police and the JCF to conduct an investigation into the allegations of against SP Hewitt, and thereafter being satisfied that he was suitable for promotion, the Police Service Commission recommended to the Governor General that he be promoted. Aggrieved by the decision, the Jamaica for Justice sought judicial review on the basis essentially that the PSC had not done a thorough and independent investigation into the allegations against SP Hewitt, and that this failure was a breach of the PSC's duty under the police service regulations. Jamaica for Justice was unsuccessful in its challenge both before the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal. On appeal to Her Majesty in Council on March 25 of this year, the Privy Council, Mr. Speaker, made it clear, and this is something that we should all be mindful of, that all organs of the state must exercise their functions in a manner compatible with the fundamental rights of persons, including the right to due process of law guaranteed by sections 13 subsection 2, 3, A and G and R of the Constitution. The board went further to say that it was disposed to accept that the right to equality before the law, like the right to equal protection of the law, affords every person protection against irrationality, fundamental unfairness, or arbitrary exercise of power. In relation to the PSC, the board held that these principles required the Commission to make further inquiries into the allegations made against the former superintendent before making recommendations to the Governor General for his promotion. Specifically, Mr. Speaker, the board held that the Independent Commission of Investigations, although then only 8 months into existence, should have been approached by the Commission. Turning to the International Affairs Division, Mr. Speaker, currently there are 6 full-time members of the Commercial Affairs Division. I said international, but the Commercial Affairs Division. 3 legal consultants who comprise the Commercial Task Force. Mr. Speaker, several of the agreements handled by the government, handled by the Commercial Affairs Division, contain confidentiality clauses or commercially sensitive information, and therefore I cannot outline all aspects of the matters handled. But to the extent that I can, I want to highlight Wigton Wind Farm IPO. During the period, the Chambers was represented on the enterprise team and contributed to the preparatory work necessary to launch the initial public offering, inviting prospective investors to apply for a total of 11 million shares in the capital of Wigton Wind Farm Limited. Wigton is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Petroleum Corporation of Jamaica and is the largest wind farm in the English-speaking Caribbean. It supplies 62.7 megawatts of wind energy to the national grid. It operates efficiently, achieving its financial and production targets, helping the Ministry of Energy to achieve its objectives of developing local renewable energy sources as an alternative to imported fossil fuels. Mr. Speaker, there is the work on the Bank of Jamaica Amendment Bill 2018. The Chambers continue to play its role in revising the legislation required for the modernization of the governance framework of the Bank of Jamaica, which is now before a joint select committee of this Parliament for review. The amendments seek to strengthen the independence of the central bank and to make provisions for enhanced accountability to the Parliament and the public. Divestment of the commercial assets of the Cocoa Industry Board. Mr. Speaker, in August 2018, the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, MICA, instructed the Development Bank of Jamaica, the DBJ, as a government privatization agency to proceed to advertise the assets of the Cocoa Industry Board by way of limited tender. Approval was given for an undated request for proposal, the RFP, to be prepared and for parties that had previously expressed an interest in the assets to be sent the RFP material. A project team was formed comprising representatives of MICA, the DBJ, and the Chambers. The Chambers provided legal support and advice in the process of retender, leading to the circulation of the RFP in November 2018. Mr. Speaker, we also acted in the divestment of lands, part of Stuart Castle, Trelawney, to Amatera Jamaica Limited for resort development. In fact, we acted as carriage of sale attorneys for the Commission of Lands, which was vendor for on behalf of the Government of Jamaica in the sale of approximately 99 hectares of land to a private sector developer. The project is expected to comprise an integrated resort and residential development, commencing with construction of an 800-room all-inclusive hotels, among other things. But of note, Mr. Speaker, is a special condition of the sale, as directed by Cabinet, that the land should be retransferred if the purchaser did not substantially commence the project within 2 years of the date of transfer, that is by January 2021. Mr. Speaker, we also worked on the protocol between the Government of Jamaica, acting through the Ministry of Health, and the People's Republic of China, acting through the National Health and Family Planning Commission, regarding dispatching of Chinese ophthalmologic team to carry out cataract surgery activities in Jamaica. 500. We advised the Ministry of Health in respect of the last of multiple revisions of a protocol between the Government of Jamaica and the People's Republic of China. And Mr. Speaker, we're told that the project was a success, and the target of over 500 Jamaican patients being treated during the month of April 2019 was met. And we congratulate the ministry, Mr. Speaker. Then, Mr. Speaker, there is the loan contract between Jamaica and the Inter-American Development Bank. The Minister of Finance made the announcement of the contingent loan for natural disaster emergencies. We want to indicate that we both advised on and assisted the Ministry of Finance in negotiating on a clause-by-clause basis the loan contract between Jamaica and the Inter-American Development Bank relating to this contingent loan for natural disaster emergencies. The explicit purpose of the loan contract is to establish the contingent loan terms and conditions to facilitate the execution of a project to alleviate the impact that a severe or catastrophic natural disaster could have on Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, we continue to advise the Ministry of Finance and Planning in respect of satisfying conditions precedent to disbursements. We also worked on the privatization of the Norman Manley International Airport. We provided legal advice in relation to the work, and Mr. Speaker, we continue to be of assistance. Turning now, Mr. Speaker, to the General Legal Advice Division. The General Legal Advice Division provides legal advice to ministries, departments and agencies of government on a wide range of subject matters. Mr. Speaker, the division strives at all times to ensure that these entities operate on the pillars of good administration, fairness, and natural justice. In December 2018, Mr. Speaker, and this is important, the Chamber secured funding from the Ministry of Finance to embark on an accident backlog reduction project. A project team was put in place and has been working assiduously to clear all the old accident files that have languished in the chambers for years and years, and to significantly reduce the turnaround time for the accident files that we currently receive. Mr. Speaker, it is with immense gratification that I announce that the project team has completed its work on the backlog accident files. Thereby allowing us to move closer to deliver justice to many who have been enduring hardship for too long. The recently expanded team is now working on current matters and assisting with other matters assigned to the General Legal Advice Division in an attempt to lighten the division's huge caseload and address the backlog of matters in other areas. Currently, the team comprises 5 attorneys and 1 secretary, and team members are in the gallery, including the lead of the team. Mr. Speaker, the breakdown of the work undertaken by the Angela Cousins-Robinson-led team for the period December 2018 to March 2019 is as follows. In the month of December, looking at the reason for closing files, we had 52 cases upon review that were statute barred, and we had 4 that were settled, total of 56 being dealt with. In January, 789 case files were examined and found to be statute barred and just sitting there. 67 others were settled, with a total of 856 dealt with in that month. The following month, in February, 710 were closed, 49 settled, a total of 759 dealt with. Mr. Speaker, the total files processed for the period, 2,628. Work well done. Mr. Speaker, I now move to the Constitutional and Legislative Affairs Division. Mr. Speaker, I have also worked very closely with this division, which, since my appointment as Attorney General, has been headed by Mrs. Marlene Aldred. Mr. Speaker, Mrs. Aldred, I just ask you to hold it, is a homegrown Attorney General's Chambers attorney who spent all of her professional life in the Chambers since joining in 1995. Mr. Speaker, please join me in recognizing her significant achievement and her appointment as Solicitor General of Jamaica since April 1, 2019. And Mrs. Aldred is here in the Parliament. Under her leadership, Mr. Speaker, the division fulfilled its mandate and more, and performed a range of tasks in several areas. In the area of legislation, it's been a busy year. Moving from the exciting work on the Tourism Workers' Pension Bill, which is a proposed new and unique legislative initiative, to work, new and initiative work, to work on the Road Traffic Act, the Fisheries Act, the Law Reform, Amendment of Penalties Bill, the Food Storage and Prevention of Infestation Amendment Bill, the Bauxite and Alumina Industry Encouragement Amendment Bill, the Information and Communications Technology Authority Bill, and more. Mr. Speaker, in the area of environmental and planning appeal, the division advises relevant ministers and tribunal in matters falling under legislation including the Town and Country Planning Act, the Local Improvement Act, and the Beach Control Act. Then under the area of appeal, under the Access to Information Act, which allows citizens to gain access to official documents held by public authorities, subject to specified exemptions. Mr. Speaker, you do know that any person in Jamaica has the right to use the appellate process, which includes the right of appeal to the Access to Information Tribunal, where that person holds a view that the public authority has not acted in accordance with the legislation and is hiding information. The Chambers has been involved in much work in this area over the past year, and in doing so, we have ensured that the letter and spirit of the legislation is upheld, and that information, particularly, for example, where it affects the private lives of persons, is treated with due regard for the constitutional rights of those to whom the information concerns. We recognize that there are weaknesses in the system in some ministries and have offered advice on how to strengthen the processes, including training relevant officers. The division has also assisted other divisions in the Chambers to ensure that the work is done. I move now, Mr. Speaker, to the International Affairs Division. And recent matters in the news really bring into sharp focus the work that is done across this division and other ministries, departments, and agencies. Mr. Speaker, the leadership of the division is now in transition, as Dr. Cathy Brown has left us, but is here with us in the House today in the gallery. I put on record my deep appreciation for the work Dr. Brown has done for the government of Jamaica. She is an outstanding international law expert whom we hope to continue to call on for assistance. So, Mr. Speaker, the International Affairs Division advises the government on matters concerning international law. The division works on a diverse range of areas, including CARICOM, international trade, international human rights, law of the sea, maritime delimitation, aviation law and policy, international environmental law, and matters concerning international security, including mutual legal assistance, drug trafficking, human trafficking, anti-corruption, anti-money laundering, and counter-terrorism measures. Division also represents the government in drafting and negotiating bilateral and multilateral treaties and agreements, provides advice on Jamaica's obligation under these instruments, and does domestic implementation of these obligations, prepares reports to international bodies on compliance and progress in implementing conventions and resolutions. At the Caribbean community level, Mr. Speaker, the division continued its participation in meetings of the senior officials of the Legal Affairs Committee, and I just handed over chairmanship of that committee. The division provided immeasurable support to me when I sat in the chair, Mr. Speaker. And among the work we did in providing the organs and bodies of CARICOM with advice on international legal issues, we looked at harmonization of laws of the community. And in the reporting year, the division advised on matters pertaining to trade in goods and services, free movement of skill regime, and contingent rights of CARICOM nationals, their spouse, and dependents. It had been an outstanding sore issue for a long time. Mr. Speaker, in the area of human rights, one highlight of the division's work this year was providing comments to inform Jamaica's position on the Windrush compensation consultation. The division continues to respond to petitions submitted to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and provided comments on principles developed by the Commission on the human rights of migrants. The division also contributed to reports made by Jamaica to international bodies on national systems to protect the rights of older persons, human rights in the administration of justice, the implementation of the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Earlier this year, the division liaised with a range of stakeholders across government to inform Jamaica's progress on the implementation of the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption. Division also provided support in the extensive discussion on the custom bills, which has been brought to the House today, with a view to ensuring this new legislation addresses the interest of all stakeholders in order to facilitate trade and economic growth. Mr. Speaker, the Division has continued to provide advice to inform Jamaica's position in the ongoing negotiations to develop an internationally legal binding instruments under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea to govern the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in areas beyond the national jurisdiction. It has been a busy year for the Division. I now turn to the Human Resource Management and Administration Division. Mr. Speaker, this division is sometimes overlooked, but it performs key administrative services. It comprises HR staff, secretaries, library staff, registry staff, paralegals, and our attendants and drivers. Although some of their successes for the period are also captured in the centralization of legal service aspects of this presentation, I should like to highlight some other area of work done by the division. Mr. Speaker, of critical importance, the registration for access to the library and its online services has been expanded to the benefit of members of the LSUs, the legal service units. Also, renovation to offices was conducted to make the long days spent in the chambers more comfortable. New registry protocols have been instituted to streamline registry services to achieve new efficiencies. And Mr. Speaker, new IT staff have also made a huge difference and assisted with the rollout of new services with the assistance of the transition project team. Mr. Speaker, I'm almost at the end of the presentation. The work of the chambers cross-cuts all of government.
Minister, the member's time for speaking has expired. You may.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the member's time be extended sufficient to enable her to complete her presentation.
Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? As a Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the work of the chambers cross-cuts all of government and places us right at its very heart to ensure adherence to the rule of law. Mr. Speaker, I take no pleasure in saying, therefore, that we are sometimes disabled in discharging our functions effectively because our client ministries, departments and agencies generally do not submit timely instructions. And when instructions are received, they are generally inadequate. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, in spite of the improvements, we are still woefully under-resourced for the level of work entrusted to us. A recent estimate of files held by the chambers has disclosed the following, Mr. Speaker. Number of active files, 24,030. Number of inactive files, 5,260. Total number of files, 29,290. Our current establishment, Mr. Speaker, has us with less than 50 attorneys and under 50 administrative support staff. Even with the best of will and talent, we are not able to turn around the work at a pace that we would like. Not only are our client MDAs negatively impacted, but so too are the people who are involved in this matter. And this is something that I want to ask my colleagues to impress upon their staff, the critical importance of responding to suits and providing instructions, full instructions, in a timely way. Mr. Speaker, this presentation should not be closed without my speaking about the seismic ruling of the Constitutional Court in the Julian Robinson against the Attorney General case, the infamous NIDS case. Well, Mr. Speaker, there is so much to reflect on. You know what? So many questions that remain unanswered. I should point out that under our system, Mr. Speaker, the learned Chief Justice nor any judge of the Supreme Court does not have the final say on what the law is. It is how our system is. Mr. Speaker, there are many curious aspects of the judgment that, to my mind, should properly be reviewed by the higher courts. And I just cite by example, a judge relying on so-called expert evidence, not led in a case upon which he make findings of facts without submission. And I could cite other things, but since the government has taken the policy decision not to appeal, I will say no more at this time. Still trying to come to grips with the experience in the court. Mr. Speaker, I therefore close by thanking my constituents
Order, please.
for allowing me the privilege to sit in this honorable house as their representatives, and the Prime Minister for entrusting me with this enormous responsibility. To my staff at the chambers, my personal assistant, my security officers, the Ministry of Justice, including my learned friend, the Minister of Justice, my learned and good friend, the Minister of Justice, my parliamentary colleagues on both sides, my friends and family, especially my dear husband, I want to say thank you for being part of this journey. Most importantly, Mr. Speaker, I thank my God for his faithfulness towards me and his mercies that are new every single day. God bless Jamaica, land of love.
Well done.
You sure you're at the first spot? You sure?
Mr. Speaker, I ask that there be a recommittal of items from bills brought from the Senate to public business, Mr. Speaker.
The motion is that we recommit items starting with bills brought to the Senate. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Leader, you may recommit.
The following is a message from the President of the Senate. To the Honorable House of Representatives, I have the honor to advise the Honorable House of Representatives that on the 21st day of June 2019, a bill entitled An Act to Make Provisions for the Establishment and Administration of Trust and for Connected Matters was passed in the Senate with 6 amendments.
Yes, I know. That's what I'm looking for. I know. Mr. Speaker, I now ask that the Senate amendments to the bill shortly entitled the Trust Act 2019 be considered and approved at a later stage today.
Is that consent given? Consent given. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motion given orally. Sorry, report from committees. Do you have a report? Notice of motion.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance and the Public Service, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, he will move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Customs Act 2019. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House I will move. Be it resolved with reference to the resolution passed by this Honourable House on the 12th day of February 2019, agreeing that the composition of all committees of the House remain unchanged in this season of Parliament, except by approved resolution of this Honourable House, that the name Dayton Campbell be removed from the list of members of the Constituency Development Fund Committee and the name Dwayne Vaz be substituted therefore. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Questions and answers to questions. Mr. Caenwood.
Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. At the expiration of 21 days, I will ask the Honourable Minister of Mining and Transport the following questions.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire when the questions listed in my name on the order paper to the Minister of Education will be answered? The time has elapsed.
That is a matter that will be dealt with hopefully at the next sitting of the House. There is a question that has been addressed to the Minister without portfolio. And I often wonder if it might not have been better to direct that question to the person who is operationally in charge of the Minister of Education. But that's a matter that we will discuss at the next sitting of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And whichever, whether it's Dan or Beersheba, who answers, provided we get the answers, that's fine. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask you to invite the member from Central Westmoreland to ask the question standing in his name.
Mr. Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Should I ask them all at once? Member, you want me to? Yes, Minister, can I answer all the questions that are standing in my name in the most appropriate way possible?
Minister Samuda.
Mr. Speaker, question number 1. Why was Nutrition Products Limited factory in Westmoreland closed? Answer. The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information reorganized its school feeding program in 2018. This was as a result of an audit of the products being provided to the school by Nutrition Products Limited. The audit revealed the following. 1. Products were being delivered late to some schools. In some cases, the products were stale before arrival. And 3, there were inconsistencies in the quality of the products. And 4, a reduction in the number of schools served by the Nutrition Products Limited. Following consultation with principals in affected schools island-wide, over 95% of those contacted indicated that they would prefer receiving the money to make their own purchases. The Ministry of Education, as a result, directed Nutrition Products Limited to reduce the number of schools supplied from the 553 to 71 schools for the beginning of the 2018 school year. This was after a careful assessment was done with the regional directors and the schools island-wide to determine the needs of each school. Each school was treated on its own merit based on further demands coming from the schools in the ministry. 328 schools were added, increasing that number to 399 in October 2018. Based on the new arrangements, the matter of operating all 3 plants was discussed, and the company which reported that it was not economically feasible to operate the 3 plants, which consequently led to the closure of the Westmoreland plant. 2. How was the efficiency of this plant assessed in comparison to the other nutrition product factories still in operation? Answer. With the exception of additional transportation costs, the rural plants, warehouse, and distribution costs, there is no variation in the production costs for all 3 plants. In addition, the Kingston facility has the capacity to produce and deliver the required solutions. It must be noted, too, that the management and administrative offices are located in Kingston. The cost to operate the Kingston facility would be the lowest compared to that of St. Mary and Westmoreland. The St. Mary facility, located approximately 54 kilometers from Kingston, would be cheaper than the Westmoreland facility, located some 202 kilometers from the head office at the Kingston facility. Nutrition Products Limited has reported that they have saved on transportation costs to the Westmoreland plant due to its proximity, which would be far less economical to traverse than that of transporting to and from the St. Mary plant. With the closure of the Westmoreland plant, there was no additional cost for production, factory overheads, distribution, and transportation costs involved, as the Kingston facility can produce the volume of solutions required. 3. Can a report outlining these figures be provided for all 3 factories over the last 5 years? And member, you will note that the schedule is attached to the answers given to you in writing. I won't bother to go through the specific details. Question 4. Why wasn't an official meeting or engagement held with the workers and independent contractors attached to the factory since closure of operations in June 2018? Answer. There has been ongoing discussions with the management of the NPL regarding the workers at the Westmoreland plant. NPL communicates on a regular basis with the management of the plant. Additionally, the ministry convened several meetings with the board chair and managing director of Nutrition Products Limited. This included the monthly school feeding coordination committee meeting, which is chaired by the permanent secretary, where this matter was always discussed. The discussion surrounded having the employees absorbed into various aspects of the Ministry of Education's work infrastructure was also recommended. The relevant data was also collected in relation to the qualification of the workers and compensation and home addresses, their location. The process of engagement had started. A meeting was held with the managing director of NPL, the chief education officer, the human resource manager, and the factory manager of the Westmoreland plant in December 2018. A meeting was also held in February 2019 with the CEO, the HR manager of NPL, the legal unit, and other officers of the ministry, specifically to examine the proposal to have the staff relocated to other areas of the ministry. A further meeting with the HR manager of NPL and the acting permanent secretary was held at the NPL Westmoreland plant as recently as May 24, 2019. At that meeting, several options were explored, which are now being processed for the staff to be re-engaged. The delivery contractors are independent contractors, providing a service to the company based on the demand for that service. Deliveries were discontinued from the plant and were being routed out of Kingston with reduced numbers consistent with the reduction in demand. A formal meeting was held with the contractors by the factory manager of NPL, duly advising them of the changes. NPL offered these contracts to the better performing contractors and those who were prepared to accept the new rules. Neither the NPL nor the Ministry of Education had an obligation to provide revenue for independent contractors. Like all independent service providers, some made themselves available, others did not. The selection was made from those, of course, who made themselves available. Question 5. What is the current cost incurred to transport products from Kingston to schools in Westmoreland? There are currently 2 routes operating from the Kingston plant at a cost of $107,680 per day for 4 days each week, as indicated in the table below. Current rate of deliveries from Kingston plant to the schools in Westmoreland and St. Elizabeth using two routes. 107, and it indicates there, $107,680. So, Mr. Speaker, that is the full sum and substance of the answers to the questions asked by the member.
Mr. Clark.
Thank you, member. Just some observations and some follow-ups with regards to the answers. For the first question, it was said that the audit revealed that products were delivered late to some schools. It was also said in some cases the products were stale before arrival. Based on the information we have, and based on I think what the PSs have collected at the factory also, this issue actually came up after the products were started to be delivered from Kingston. This was not an issue when the products were being delivered when the factory was in operation at Westmoreland. There was no such issue about spoilage and products being substandard. This issue actually came up after the plant was closed and the goods were being transported from Kingston to this particular plant. So I would like you to just check on that to clarify how that information came up. Also, with regards to question 2, I was thinking if you have 3 plants, one in Kingston, one in St. Mary, and one in Westmoreland, and based on the information I provided that the administrative offices are in Kingston, so that it's easier to operate and to distribute things from there, I would think if you're going to think of closing another plant and keeping Kingston, I would try to figure out what can be how you could justify keeping a plant in St. Mary, which is about 2 hours away, and would serve the eastern end, which Kingston is easier to serve the eastern end compared to closing a plant all the way in Westmoreland, which would normally provide for the other parishes like St. Elizabeth and those parishes closer to Westmoreland. So it was hard for me to justify why could you close the plant, the only plant on that side of the island, to keep the 2 on this side. It just doesn't seem as practical or common sense with regards to how we move forward to cut costs overall. So I still have an issue with that. Also, you mentioned the meetings that were held. The meeting at the PS. The question. Okay. This one and then you respond, Minister. For question 3, read the meetings that were held. All right. Maybe I want to go ahead and answer those 2 and then we.
Well, of course, member, the suggestion that the spoilage took place after the products started being delivered from Kingston is one for certification. I'd have to certify that that is so. I'm not so advised because we did an audit and the users, the stakeholders, the main stakeholders suggested that they were dissatisfied with the product as it arrived in Westmoreland. So I would have to check that carefully. In respect of the journey, as I said, it was 202 kilometers from Kingston to Westmoreland and 54 from Kingston to St. Mary. The cost in transportation between the 2 is significant. So it would be cheaper to keep the plant in St. Mary where the transportation costs, because the plant that makes the product is in Kingston, that has the capacity to produce for all areas. So the differential, the production cost is the same, the differential is in the transportation cost. And Westmoreland, of course, you will agree, is a lot further away from Kingston than is St. Mary. And that was the rationale there. But I will...
Minister, just to follow up, the transportation of what? Because the plant in Westmoreland does produce and would normally distribute to the parishes surrounding Westmoreland.
No.
So what is the transportation of what from Kingston?
Which one to close? Westmoreland or St. Mary? What was undeniable and what was the decision that had been taken is that one of the three had to be closed. Because what we had was we had excess capacity in Kingston and the differential was transportation. And in any event, the decision was taken by the stakeholders again, where there was a preference. They wanted the money to take care of their own supplies. So it was not a question where they wanted to terminate the supply and not be given funds to take care of their own needs. So the funds are more localized, their preferences, and of course there was a change in the menu. And the menu that is being engaged now, it was reverted to the baked products rather than other products which proved more challenging and more expensive.
All right, Minister, still stand by that particular point, really. The fact that it is so far away, naturally, if you had kept that one open, because you had made a decision to close, naturally transportation costs would be higher going to Westmoreland. But if you had kept Westmoreland open, it means that they would have been produced and distributed to parishes around Westmoreland. So if you look at the overall economic benefit, I still think it would have been more practical to keep the plant further away open than the one closer to Kingston. In addition to that,
but that doesn't mean that the products that are sent from Kingston do not get delivered in St. Elizabeth and surrounding parishes.
I understand, but the traveling time would be less and the risk of spoilage would also be low if you're transporting to parishes closer. So that's why I mentioned that. The question really meetings and why it took so long to meet. The actual meeting where they went to the factory on May 24th was actually held after I initially posed the questions at the PAAC. So when you mentioned that they had a recent meeting, this was the first meeting where members actually from the ministry went to the plant to meet with the actual workers to inform them of the current situation. This was the first actual meeting. So yes, you mentioned some meetings with the CEO, but what I'm saying is that no meeting was held with the workers prior to when the questions were posed at the committee of PAAC that were posed by me. So this May 24th meeting was actually held after that particular issue came up. Also, I noticed it was mentioned that a formal meeting was held with the contractors of the factory manager. And what I'm asking, or the follow-up I would ask is, when was this meeting held and what method was used to inform them? Because it was mentioned here that some turned up and some didn't. So I want to ensure that everybody was actually contacted. So I want to find out what method was used to actually contact each and every contractor to ensure that everybody knew that the meeting was being held, and also to ensure that they were there to find out what are the new terms and policies that will be moved forward with. In addition, Minister, last question. It was also stated that coming out of the meeting with the PS, there were some new ideas, like some new options to be explored, which are now being processed for the staff to be re-engaged. I would like to know what are these particular options, also what time period are we looking at for these options to be explored, and also if this means that the factory will be reopened, and if it is so, when will it be reopened?
It is unlikely that the factory will be reopened. It is unlikely. But in the preparation of and the procurement of meals through funds that are provided to St. Mary, that was previously provided by the factory, it requires staff to engage that process. and also the other assistance, the other attendant facilities that are going to be required to ensure that the products that arrive from Kingston are properly distributed will require staff. It is in the process of integrating them into that new system that they will more than likely be re-engaged. That is for the staff. There is no obligation on the part of anyone who has a private contractor who has their own truck to engage them in protracted meetings. Those who are interested, as I mentioned, have made themselves available. My information is they made themselves available and they were accepted. Those who were not obviously interested did not make themselves available.
Just a follow-up, Mr. That's why I'm asking if you can provide us with the information with regards to how were they contacted, because I just want to know if everybody was contacted for them to have that decision to make if they are interested or not. Because that is what I'm trying to get at, because I didn't hear of that meeting, as I said, so it's new information for me, but I just want to know if all contractors were contacted before this meeting for them to have that choice for themselves to decide if they wanted to be a part of it or not. So that is the actual question I'm asking.
Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Minister, would you be kind enough to, when you can, provide a copy of the audit that you referred to in the answer to question 1? Please. Secondly, in respect of the money that's being given in place of the products from Nutrition Holdings, would you be able to say whether this money covers all students at the schools so bestowed, or is it only for the students on PATH? And would you be able to indicate, thirdly, the 399 schools, roughly half of the primary schools in Jamaica, what are the products that are being delivered to them? And are all the remainder of the schools being given money? And will you confirm that the school feeding program applies for 4 days of the week or 5? Thank you, Minister.
Mr. Savio.
Remember, I can't give you specific details on the question as to whether these are dedicated to PATH persons. I do know that the provision of school feeding is focused primarily on PATH students or that parents are on PATH. So I would have to confirm that these meals are specifically devoted to persons on the PATH. As far as the audit is concerned, a copy of that audit I will provide for you. And as far as the products are concerned, you know, we have sought to change the menu. It worked out to be almost twice the price. And it was not to the satisfaction of the students. And so we have reverted to the use of the nutrition buns and bottled water, sugar-free buns, and that sort of thing, which is far more easily maintained and kept in a fresh state and more acceptable to the students. And I'm advised that the nutritional content is very, very good. And so it is a question that we will seek to expand the amount and the reach of those products to enable those children who go to school from especially vulnerable communities, and by 10 o'clock they're falling asleep because they're not able to keep up with the rigors of the class. So therefore, I will confirm that definitely.
I just remind Mr. Speaker, is it 4 days or 5 days that the provision is for?
My understanding is that it is 4 days, but I will confirm again whether it is 4 or 5. But in most cases, it's 4 days. But I will seek to determine, because remember, it is a function of available resources. And we all know that in the area of school feeding, there is a great gap that has to be filled. And in getting the specific answer to the question you asked, we must take that into consideration.
Mr. Speaker, thank the Minister very much. Just invite him when he's considering the policies. There is a tremendously high absentee rate on the days when food is not supplied. And undoubtedly there's a cost to provide for 5 days, but the correlation between absenteeism and school feeding is a very real one, and I'm sure that he will want to attend to that as soon as possible.
Mr. Speaker, in addition, Minister, to the snacks which were provided for lunch, there was also a breakfast program for the infant school and those at the grade 1-2 level. What now prevails as it relates to the provision of breakfast items for those students?
The breakfast items to where? To Westmoreland? Generally? Well, whatever prevailed is what exists. There has been no change in the facilities offered on the path. I mean, it is not enough to satisfy the enormous demand, but there is no change in policy with respect to the provision of facilities, especially in the more vulnerable communities.
See, Minister, a number of schools are not currently getting any of the items which were promulgated by the Honourable Minister, former Minister of Education. We would like to know, will that be revisited for the new school year as we approach the start of the new school year? What will happen? Because the students are really looking out forward to it, and the teachers have been inquiring what will happen. Could you assure the nation as to what will happen come September?
Remember, I can tell you that I've made very strong representation to the Prime Minister and to the Minister of Finance for additional resources to take us through the end of this financial year. Because one of the things that jumped out at me when I arrived and looked at it and was explained to me is the absolute deficiency in the provisions to assist people from vulnerable areas, path and so forth. So I can assure you that based on my discussions, I have reason to be very optimistic that things will be markedly improved as we go into the new school year. Mr. Speaker, I now invite you to ask who asked you the question? Oh, the member from Central Kingston. Your question is about to be answered. Ronnie, your question is about to be answered by the Minister of Transport and Mining.
Mr. Tweed.
Mr. Speaker, would the Minister of Transport kindly answer the questions that have been addressed to him by me?
Mr. Woman.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. The question is the area of South Trelawney, including the application for mining for 173, part of the protected area of the cockpit country?
Marisa.
And if not, why not?
Marisa.
Response: no. The cockpit country protected area is a no mining area as declared by the Honourable Prime Minister. Currently, ground truthing is being conducted to establish and finalize the exact boundary. Special mining lease 173 is not a part of that area.
Mr. Speaker, why not?
Mr. Speaker, the cockpit country protected area, as was demonstrated in the House by the Prime Minister, came after many years of consultation and finally negotiation and discussions, and he came to the House, and the House accepted the proposed boundaries, which was larger than the UWI and other boundaries, and the boundaries were established. The Forest Department is on the ground now trying to establish the boundaries. The member, I am sure, and other members also had an opportunity when the Prime Minister made his presentation to the House to raise the questions. And the Special Mining Lease 173 is not a part of the cockpit country protected area.
Mr. Speaker, so that means, Mr. Minister, does that mean then that the communities that are encompassed in the designation of mining lease number 173, including places like Troy, I believe Ulster Spring, Low River, going right back to the St. Anne border, are open for mining? Is that what the minister is saying?
Mr. Speaker, I think the member has it a little wrong, but in terms of the communities. But, Mr. Speaker, the Special Mining Lease 173, I hear the member is running and jumping to conclusions. Let me put his soul at rest. Special Mining Lease 173 that has been issued has with it certain conditions, and that any application for mining has to meet these very stringent conditions before any consideration can be given to mining.
Mr. Speaker, if I am a little in error, to quote the minister, would the minister please be kind enough to indicate those communities that are encompassed within the curtilage of mining lease 173 now?
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, I am not in a position to name all the communities at this time. However, the member has my word, my solemn word, that I will provide a list to him in short order.
Mr. Speaker, would the minister commit to have that list next week? I'm sure it's perfectly early within, or ready within his ken, his knowledge, and short order, even in masculine terms, can be quite confusing. Further, Mr. Speaker, will the minister acknowledge that any human community within this is going to suffer extreme destruction and depredation as a result of mining? And will the minister state why any settled community in this area would be made to suffer in this way? For what greater good?
Mr. Speaker, let me assure the member and the House and the country that this government, this administration puts the people above everything else. And you are well aware of that. And, Mr. Speaker, furthermore, mining has occurred across the length and breadth of Jamaica. And yes, there has been issues. But in this instance, this government, this administration has made it absolutely clear. And that is why the mining lease that is outside of the protected area has certain conditions attached. It is not a foregone conclusion that mining will be done in this area. It is not a foregone conclusion.
Mr. Speaker, is the minister aware? Well, first of all, will the minister state whether that license has in fact been signed and granted? Secondly, is the minister aware that many of the communities who have been approached by the mining company and offered greenhouses as a substitute for their traditional foreign exchange earning yam cultivations and other elements of farming, and have been promised that they could be flag men to secure alternate employment? Is he aware of that kind of planned destruction already underway? Some have got notice already. Is he aware of any of this?
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I rise as a member of Parliament for South Trelawney, where the cockpit, most of our cockpit country and the discussions take place here now. I have had discussions with the Prime Minister and I have had discussions with the Minister, and I am satisfied that this government of which I am a part, could never interfere with the cockpit country. And I say so as I stand on my feet, and I will let this House know that yesterday, when it was hot all over Jamaica, and the rains that we expected in May did not come, amazingly, we had nearly 3 hours of continuous rainfall until our hailstorm in the evening, and people were in their jackets. And that water supply, we supply 40% of the fresh water that goes to the area. And I know I speak on behalf of the people of South Trelawney, the cockpit country, that we are certainly not going to accept flagmen posts or anything like that in exchange for what we have in the cockpit country. I have indicated very clearly, and as I said, I am satisfied with the discussions with both the Prime Minister and the Minister, because there is a golden opportunity. We have an excellent opportunity to have a nutraceutical industry there. There are lots of things that they can do that will bring in tremendous earnings for the cockpit country, the people who live there, and improve on what they earn from farming. And there's so much more than to just excavate the bauxite, which is, and I might just add, bauxite in areas like Sawyers. As a member of Parliament, I hardly ever give fertilizer to those people, because the yams grown in Sawyers don't need fertilizer. The bauxite earth is rich and produces the best yams. The exporters tell me that when they get yam from Sawyers, 10%, it equates for 30–40% of what they get from the rest of Trelawney. So I want to assure the House and member that I've had discussions, and as a people, I'm comfortable with the discussions I've had, and I just want to say, as a people, we are a humble farming community, but we stand firm in our belief that the cockpit country will be and must be protected.
Mr. Speaker, will the Minister kindly answer the questions I had asked him before the member for South Trelawney arose? May I remind him, has that mining lease 173?
Please, let me hear, Mr. Tweed.
Has that mining lease been signed? And if so, having regard to the representation of the member for South Trelawney and the efforts that I'm making, will that mining lease be cancelled?
Mr. Speaker, the member from Central Kingston should understand, and he does understand, that when any entity applies to do prospecting or exploration, a mining lease is issued. Once the checks are done, the environmental checks are done, and the environmental impact assessment is done and consultation, then a special mining license has to be issued before any mining can be done. A mining lease is not a license to mine, it's a license to prospect. And the consultation and the attendant documentation to get approval from our environmental agencies and authorities has to be done before a special mining permit is issued. A special mining permit has not been issued for SML 173.
Mr. Speaker, thank the Minister very much. But in that event, why would the government be sanctioning the prospecting by the company who is going and speaking to institutions like the South Trelawney Environment Organization and indicating to them that which is going to be given to them in substitute for the pristine land which they now form? So it's not me jumping the gun, Mr. Speaker. It's the mining operations who seem to have some peculiar let by the government of Jamaica. It is to forestall that these questions are asked. Absolutely no denial that this is what is happening on the ground. This is credibly reported. The minister must know this, and the minister must ask, must answer whether, in fact, whatever the stage it is at, whether some people are presuming, and in fact may, as has happened in the past in our bauxite history, I happen to know this, where they, in fact, proceed to do something and catch up with the law afterwards. Mr. Speaker, it's a serious matter.
Mr. Speaker, I must agree with the member from Central Kingston that this is serious matters, very serious. And I want to again assure the member that this minister, this administration, is not in about having the paperwork catch up. We're not into that. This administration will do things properly and will do things in the right order. And he can be assured that this minister, more than any other minister, is best qualified to treat with the issues of the people of South Trelawney and the cockpit country.
Mr. Speaker, and I want to assure this House, as I stand, that the people of South Trelawney will not sit idly by and allow this to happen. We will not. So, the bauxite company or the mining, they can do whatever they have, and they can promise whatever they want to. Believe me, we will not sit idly by and allow the cockpit country to be mined out.
Mr. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, will the Minister confirm on that there is still no order yet banning mining in the cockpit country, and could he indicate when will we get such an order banning mining in the cockpit country?
As soon as the order, the protection order is gazetted, that encompasses that, and the documentation is being drafted, and no, I don't want to. I have a timeline, but whenever I have noticed that as a politician, whenever you give a timeline and anything happens, if rainfall or something happens, you get beaten on the head, and I don't want to distract from another activity that you are involved in. So at this time, I'm not prepared to give a timeline.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, yes, the Minister had earlier given a commitment in his sectoral debate for a broad-based committee to manage the portfolio. What is the timeline for that to be established, or should we wait until certain activities are over with?
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to inform the member that this morning I signed off on the membership of that broad-based committee, the Mining Council, and incredibly, the seat for the opposition was left off. And I insisted, as I had given a commitment in this House, that the member had raised it in the sectorial, and I am committed to having the member sit on it. No. The member knows me better than that. He knows I was a member of the Energy Council when he was chairman. And I've been to those meetings and I've seen the value of these broad-based consultations. And I assure the member that long before your other event, the first meeting will be held.
Mr. Shamura.
All right, Mr. Speaker, I invite you to
Order, please.
to go on to public business, where we're going to invite the Minister of Tourism to close the debate on the Tourism Pensions Act.
Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to close the debate on this landmark social legislation entitled the Tourism Workers' Pension Bill 2019. Mr. Speaker, the passage of this bill will make Jamaica the world leader in providing tourism workers social security. It represents a commitment by the government to the social market arrangement, which is to ensure that the appropriate legislation and regulations are developed to protect the vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, this bill is coming at a time when tourism is experiencing unprecedented growth. Globally, the trends are there that 1.4 billion visitors are going across borders, and last year spent 1.7 trillion US dollars in more than 200 countries. You recall here in Jamaica, Mr. Speaker, that we broke all records. And last year we had 3.3 billion US dollars earned from just over 4.3 million visitors. And so far for this year, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to tell you that again we are on track to break all records in 2019. For the first half of the year, Mr. Speaker, we have cleared 2 million visitors, the first time in the history of Jamaica. And we have earned close to 2 billion, and the team tells me that by July, next month, we would have cleared 2 billion US dollars in earnings from tourism in Jamaica. All this development, Mr. Speaker, begs some questions. And perhaps you would recall that only last week I was in Azerbaijan with the World Tourism Organization, and use the opportunity to make the point that tourism being the #1 growth industry in the world today, with the kind of numbers that we are throwing out in terms of earnings, must take greater responsibility to ensure a greater sense of equity and to reduce the imbalances that the inequities are causing and enabling countries that are highly dependent on tourism to have a better stake in the global economic space. That point, Mr. Speaker, has had resonance, and only on Sunday, one of the noted journalists and columnists from the UK picked it up and made the point that we have to spend more time to make sure that the benefits of tourism is available to all in the communities that are tourism dependent. So it is against that background, Mr. Speaker, that we look at what are the most treasured and most important assets in the tourism industry. And it's clearly the people. And therefore, if we are to build the capacity of tourism to deliver on the prosperity agenda, we must build the capacity of the people. The human capital must be enhanced. And it is for that reason, Mr. Speaker, that our policies and our programs in the ministry have been geared towards the building of the human capacity. The training programs that we have established through Team Jamaica that have brought more than 8,000 workers and individuals across the industry into training and certification. We established the Jamaica Center of Tourism Innovation to create a pathway to professionalism in the industry by creating certification for workers who are competent but not qualified in the formal sense, and to give them global recognized qualifications so they can have stackable credentials to be able to peddle their wares, not only in Jamaica, but anywhere in the world that they go. And in that course, Mr. Speaker, we have looked at a whole series of training arrangements, beginning at the high school level. And so for the first time in our history, last September, 450 students from 33 high schools across Jamaica enrolled in a program for associate degree in hospitality services at the high schools in Jamaica. And that will increase to 650 by 2020 next year, Mr. Speaker. So these moves that we have made are to elevate and to build. And we went even further. Now we are partnering with the University of the West Indies to establish the first graduate program in tourism and hospitality. And so in 2020 in Montego Bay, the Faculty of Tourism will emerge through the business school that is to be established there by the UII, and the Center of Tourism Innovation will partner with the university in delivering a graduate program for the workers and the individuals who want to be practitioners within the tourism industry. And this, Mr. Speaker, is a game changer, because it is now going to set the stage for real professionalism in the industry. And that level of development, Mr. Speaker, will have an impact on the labor market arrangements, which leads me to the point, Mr. Speaker, of the whole business of building out an arrangement that the workers of the tourism industry can truly take their place and to be transformed from being the traditional casual workers into being professional workers, classified and remunerated according to classification. And this, Mr. Speaker, is significant that it is coming at this time from a government, again, who is committed to the social market arrangement, where we, in that philosophical frame, give space for private entrepreneurship, but maintain an arrangement through public sector activities that provides the legislative and regulative framework for enablement. We don't want to be controllers. We don't want to be involved in the sense of being at the commanding heights. That's the role of the private sector. But we must be there to protect the vulnerable and to ensure that the security of the workers is always protected. And I hear, Mr. Speaker, many talk about the practice in the industry, as seems to be a practice globally. And we went to have some discussion because we're concerned about any practice that seeks to marginalize or indeed to put at risk the position of the worker. And we are to advise that the practice of short contracts is not a desirable one. And so we went to find out from the industry exactly what is happening. And the JHTA came back to us. And I want to just read a little bit from what, in fact, they said. So, in fact, Mr. Speaker, what the JHTA has said is that a large number of their properties already employ significant persons on a permanent basis. They indicated additionally that they now have a ratio of 80 to 20 in favor of permanent employment. Mr. Speaker, I am giving the benefit of the doubt while we make sure that we confirm all of this along the way. Because this, Mr. Speaker, is something that we as a government don't want to inject ourselves into, because that's not what you do. We must provide the basis on which employment practices and ethical practices in the workplace are preserved. And so we are taking that word and moving forward, and then to make sure that in time you don't have 80-20, but you will have 100%. The changes that have taken place in the industry over the years, Mr. Speaker, will guide that movement, especially that previously tourism was a seasonal industry where you'd employ people for 6 months and then the season change and you employ them again. But now, with the volumes that we are driving and the ADRs that we are having, it is a 24/7 activity. As we move this year to about 4.5 million visitors and $3.7 billion in earning, this is an industry that is no longer a seasonal industry. It's an industry that is here with permanence and sustainability. And it is against that background, Mr. Speaker, that the dialogue can go with energy and vitality as we seek to change those practices within the labor market arrangements. And so, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to indicate that the next pillar of the protection of the worker and the securing of the highest level of human capital possible for engagement in the industry is to look at how do you ensure that the value of the worker is not minimized after his useful years have passed, so that he is not utilized to the full and then discarded. I told the story in this house when I introduced the bill first of the genesis of this piece of legislation when I went to the Norman Manley Airport in our yearly activity of meeting with staff prior to the start of the traditional winter season. And I saw this red cap who was 78 years old still pushing the trolley with luggage on it. And I said to him, "Why are you still here?" And he says, "I have to stay, Mr. Minister, because that is the only way I can eat." I asked him, "How long have you been working and doing this?" He said, 45 years. 45 years. He's now 78. Can't retire because if he retires, he has no basis on which to survive. And I said, we have to correct that. And that was in my first iteration as minister. And I made a point of commendation to my predecessor who carried the fight and who made it possible for the continuation of the program under the leadership of the permanent secretary and good people like Miss Daisy Coke and a whole slew of professional people and legal partners who sat through for those years of my sabbatical. And now on my return, they have continued the program and we have a bill today. And I'm very proud that that has happened. So, Mr. Speaker, we took note of the comments, the very valued comments of the opposition spokesman on tourism. He made a very valued contribution when he spoke when the bill was tabled. And in it he mentioned the role of the minister and the impact that that could have on the policy direction that the plan, the scheme could have, and more so, what kind of political influence may very well be brought to bear on the Board of Trustees. Equally, we took note of the fact that the Minister of Finance's position in the bill might very well also create some extended, what we call contingent liability for the government at some point in time. And in consideration of that, we have removed. And so as a result of that removal, Mr. Speaker, there are some consequential amendments which we have tabled today for consideration and which when we come to committee, we will look at in greater detail. Mr. Speaker, we're excited about the prospect of Jamaica offering to the world a model for social security of the workers of the tourism industry. We're really excited about that prospect. And we want to just conclude by indicating that this will be the largest single pension plan in Jamaica and arguably the Caribbean, because it is a plan which will involve in excess of 300,000 workers, which will represent 1/5 of the total workforce of Jamaica. That accumulation, Mr. Speaker, of affordable capital will present an opportunity for investment and for capital distribution for all sorts of development in the country. And you know that the essence of growth in a country is measured by the ability of the domestic savings of that economy to provide the investment requirement of that economy. Because it is not money borrowed from abroad. It is not money on which you will have to pay an interest externally. It is local savings. And when local savings is converted into local investment, then real growth will ensue. And so this, Mr. Speaker, is not an ordinary move that we have made. This pension plan will be, as I say, a landmark development for workers of Jamaica and arguable workers of the tourism world. May it please you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker? No. Mr. Speaker? Yes. I now ask for the second reading of the bill. Yeah, man,
the question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favor? Those against? As have it. Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Establish a Defined Contribution Pension Scheme for Tourism Workers and Self-Employed Tourism Workers, to be known as the Tourism Workers Pension Scheme, from which is to be paid retirement benefits in respect of each member and ancillary benefits for their beneficiaries, and for other connected matters, read a second time.
The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause.
Told your experience in some of what we went through in 2015.
Yes,
have you circulated it?
Yes, ma'am.
They've been circulated.
They have been circulated. Yes. You don't see yours?
No, I don't see it.
Minister Bartlett, do you have any amendments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Bring to attention.
Clause 9. Well, as you proceed, we will deal.
Okay, we proceed.
And we have circulated, as I indicated in my comment, that we have circulated the changes. So as we get to the different clauses, Mr. Speaker, I will point them out.
Tell him, Mr. Speaker, put up the clause.
Can we proceed?
Yes.
I put clause 1.
No,
Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against?
Mr. Chairman, may I strongly suggest you put clause 1 to 8 first? There are no changes to clauses 1 to 8. So you could put clauses 1 to 8.
You wish me to put clause 1 to 8?
That is correct, Chairman.
There are no amendments in any of those clauses?
No amendments.
No.
No objection? I put clause number 1 to number 8. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it.
Clause 9, no.
Clause 9, Mr. Speaker.
I put clause 9
No. Then you come in.
to 14.
Clause
no,
9.
No, Mr. Speaker. Clause 9, go ahead.
4. Clause 9(4).
You want to delete it.
We want to delete it, which allows the minister to give general policy direction to the board to be deleted. So we delete clause 9 sub 4.
Everybody hear the amendment? It's good.
Put the amendment, Chairman.
That amendment is to clause 9.
That to delete clause 9.
Yeah. Put the amendment, Chairman.
I put the amendment to clause 9. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it. I put clause 9 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it.
Could you put clause 10 and 11 together, Chairman?
I put clause 10 and 11. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it. You have an amendment to clause 12?
Clause 12, Mr. Speaker. I wish to delete subclause 2, paragraph K, which speaks to the board ensuring the assets of the scheme and to renumber the paragraph accordingly, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this paragraph was misplaced in the bill, and so therefore the new paragraph O, we want to delete the words paragraph O and substitute thereof paragraph N. So O will now become N.
And
Minister, we should have these amendments.
Yes?
They're circulated.
They're circulated, Mr. Speaker.
I don't have one before me.
Well, I know they were.
You have one now, Chairman?
Okay, which one are you amending now? Clause
12.
12.
Clause 12.
Mm-hmm.
And you're at B?
We are deleting subclause 2, paragraph K, and by that we are deleting paragraph O, and instead to institute paragraph N.
Go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, and in subclause 3, we want to delete the full stop at the end of paragraph C and to substitute therefore the following and, A-N-D. So that would be A. Now B, to insert next after paragraph C, we want to insert the new paragraph D and to insert that as follows. That D will now read, ensure the scheme or individual assets or investment of the scheme.
Am I pen over this?
And that would be the correction for clause 12.
And that concludes the amendment to clause 12?
Yes, sir.
I put the amendment to clause 12. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it. I put clause 12 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it.
Chairman, could you put clauses 13 to 31?
I put clause 13 to clause 31. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it.
And then
you have
32.
an amendment to clause 32?
Clause 32, Mr. Chairman, provides for the augmentation of the retirement savings account where it is insufficient. And then again, the minister was inserted here. So the minister is being removed from this aspect of the legislation, and the board will make that determination, Mr. Speaker. So this paragraph is to be amended now by deleting subclause 1 and substituting the following. The board may augment the total of the retirement savings account of a member to an amount that is sufficient to purchase the prescribed minimum annual pension if the balance in the retirement savings account at the date of the retirement is insufficient to purchase the prescribed minimum annual pension. That is what the new clause 32 will be.
Sorry, I put the amendment to clause 32. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it. I put clause 32 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it.
Chairman, could you put 33 to 45?
46?
To 45.
No, to 45. 33 to 45.
I put clause 33 to clause 45. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it. We have an amendment to clause 46.
Mr. Speaker, for clause 46 details the function of the actuary. And in order to enhance the function of the actuary, the following amendment is to be made. We plan, Mr. Speaker, to delete the following words where they appear after paragraph B. That is, recommend to the minister that the retirement is sufficient to purchase the prescribed minimum annual pension, and to substitute thereof, take such act as it deems necessary and appropriate.
That's the amendment to clause 46.
Yes, yes.
I put the amendment to clause 46. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it. I put clause 46 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it.
Then 47.
I put clause 47.
No,
no, that's all. Put it, Chairman. 47. Those in
47,
favor.
You have an amendment to 47?
No, Chairman.
No amendments there, Chairman.
So I put clause 47. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it. There's an amendment to clause 48.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Clause 48 details the content of the statement of investment policy and principles, and the minister shall not be involved in such an activity of the scheme. In keeping with this, we ask that the following amendments be made. 1. That in subclause 1, Mr. Chairman, to delete the words consultation with the minister responsible for finance, and substitute therefore the word such investment guidelines which may be established by the Commission from time to time. Additionally, Mr. Chairman, in subclause 3, we want to delete the words the approval of the minister responsible for finance, and substitute therefore the words such investment guidelines which may be established by the Commission from time to time. Yes, Mr.
Inclusion
Chairman.
of the amendments for 48.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Chairman.
Okay, I put the amendment to clause 48. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it. I put clause 48 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those
Could you
against? As of it.
Could you put 49 to 55, Chairman? Clauses 49 to 55.
I put clause 49 to clause 55. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it. Clause 56 has an amendment.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Clause 56 details the winding up provision of the scheme. And in subclause 2, Mr. Chairman, we wish for you to delete the word minister and substitute, therefore, the word commission.
I put the amendment in clause 46. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it. I put clause 56 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it.
Could you put clauses 57 to 62, Chairman?
I put clause 57 to clause 40.
To 62.
Clause 62. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it. Clause 63 has an amendment. Minister.
Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We ask, Mr. Chair, that this clause be deleted and that the following be substituted.
Read everything.
Exemption re income tax. The clause shall read, for the purpose of the Income Tax Act. A. The resources of the scheme shall be exempt from income tax. And we will delete B as is there and substitute a new B. And B would then read, any sum paid by any person by way of contributions to the scheme shall, in computing profits or gains for the purpose of an assessment of income tax, be allowed to be deducted as an expense incurred in the year in which the sum is paid.
Chairman,
that will be the new clause.
This is different from what was supplied earlier, so the text of it will be given to the clerk shortly.
To the clerk, right.
So just put it, Chairman.
That's the amendment to clause 63.
Right.
Yes. I put the amendment to clause 63. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it. I put clause 63 as amended.
And now the fourth schedule.
An amendment to the amendment.
Minister, I want to bring to your attention, we have an amendment to your amendment.
Well,
Yes, well, the text of which we said this is.
right. He read a new amendment.
Right.
Or the new proposed amendment.
Are you aware of that?
Yes, Chairman.
So I want to put the amendment to the amendment.
Yes.
Those in favor?
Yes. Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it. I put the amendment as
No.
amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. I put clause 63 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it.
Could you put schedules, the first to the third schedule, Chairman?
Yes.
One,
First, second, and third schedules. Could you put those, Chairman?
I put the first schedule. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it. I put the second schedule. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it. I put the third schedule. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, the fourth schedule, we ask that you delete the fourth schedule, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, which also seeks to amend the Income Tax Act, because the 63 dealt with the issue of the Income Tax Act amendments.
You're removing.
So we are removing the
Fourth
fourth schedule, yes.
As an amendment. I put the amendment. I put the amendment to the fourth schedule, which is to remove it. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it.
Done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
If we remove it. I put the title and an acting clause. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it. How many amendments? How many amendment, Minister?
Oh, thank you, Chair.
The text of that
11.
you need to give to the Mr.
Yes.
The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 11 amendments. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? Ayes have it. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 11 amendments. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the bill be read a third time.
The question is that the bill be read a third time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? Ayes have it. Clerk.
A bill entitled an act to establish a defined contribution pension scheme for tourism workers and self-employed tourism workers to be known as the Tourism Workers Pension Scheme, from which is to be paid retirement benefits in respect of each member and auxiliary benefits for their beneficiaries and for other connected matters, read a third time and passed.
Mr. Speaker, it really now gives me great pleasure to ask of you that you invite the Member of Parliament for Central St. James to move a resolution standing in his name that I am sure will accord with the wishes and support of this entire House. The resolution number 34.
Mr. Speaker,
go ahead, sir.
I rise to take the motion that stand in my name, whereas Sir Clifford Campbell was one of Jamaica's first black male decorated educator. And whereas Sir Clifford was elected to the House of the Representatives, where he served until 1949, making him one of the first black men to sit in the House under universal adult suffrage. And whereas between 1945 and 1949, he was elected chairman of the House Committee and was also the last vice president of the Elected Members Association from 1949 to 1954. And whereas he was elected as Speaker of the House in 1950 and later became the President of the Senate, which made him the only political representative to hold the highest position in both houses of Parliament. And whereas in 1962, after Jamaica gained independence as a sovereign state, he was appointed the first black Jamaican-born Governor General of Jamaica by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And whereas he was also awarded the honor of Knight Grand Cross of St. Michael and St. George, and later Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order. And whereas, apart from his teaching and political career, Sir Clifford was also very involved in community development, to include the Manchester Committee of the Western Federation of Teachers, the Board of Education from 1944 to 1945, the Westmoreland Rice Growers Association, and lastly, Vice President of the Association of Westmoreland Branches of the Jamaica Agricultural Society, and member of the delegation sent to investigate the inhumane conditions that our Jamaican farm workers had to endure in the United States of America in 1945. And whereas Sir Clifford was also Fellow of the Royal Commonwealth Society, President of Jamaica Flying Club, the Jamaica National Choral Orchestral Society, the Jamaica Youth Club Council, President and Grand Patron of the Jamaica Legion and patron of such organizations as the Boys Town Football Club, the Jamaica Agricultural Society, the Jamaica Football Federation, and the Jamaica Cancer Society. Be it resolved that the rehabilitated roadway from Maxfield to Ferris in Westmoreland fittingly be renamed the Sir Clifford Campbell Highway in honor of Westmoreland most honorable and decorated son. Thank you.
Mrs. Ford.
May it please you, Mr. Speaker, I stand to support this resolution wholeheartedly. Mr. Speaker, among other things, I'm delighted that the roadway in question from Maxfield to Ferris is being rehabilitated and will bring such relief to the people who commute between St. James and Westmoreland, Montego Bay and Savlamar, and those who use it regularly. Mr. Speaker, I believe it would be a most fitting honor to name the road as part of our respect to Sir Clifford Campbell, a distinguished son of Westmoreland. And Mr. Speaker, it is my hope that the resolution will receive the support of all members of this House. And in anticipation, we say yes to the Sir Clifford Campbell Highway. May it so please you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that this resolution be suspended for the next sitting of the House, because I know that there are members who will wish to participate who are not here today. And so I would ask that it be suspended until the next sitting of the House so that more can contribute.
Members, the Leader of Government Business has the motion on the floor that the debate be suspended until the next sitting of the House. Those in favor? Those against? As have it. Mr. Semudo.
Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today, so I invite you to suspend the sitting until next Tuesday at 2 p.m.
Mr. Paulwell, you had made a request. Samura. Mr. Paula, you may change your seat and find a proper mic. I will bring light to you in a minute, Mr. Samura. Mr. Mac.
Mr. Speaker, in the limited time that I have on this motion for adjournment, I want to bring to the attention of this Parliament the serious situation of crime and violence in my constituency of Kingston East and Port Royal. Mr. Speaker, I am mindful that being here is the fact that the people of that great constituency have put me here for 22 years. And though we have been, over time, had our fair share of intervals of serious crime and violence, I must bring to this House's attention what I regard now as acts of terror that exist in my constituency. The formal reports, Mr. Speaker, reveal that the incidence of murder has risen by 33% since the start of this year, and that the incidence of shootings that has increased by 450% since the start of this year. But even with those statistics, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
I wish that the member be not disturbed while he's making his presentation. I just ask,
yes,
because you are speaking to the world.
Yes.
Just don't say your constituency, identify it.
Yes, I did say the constituency of East Kingston and Port Royal. And just to remind you what I just mentioned, that the police report indicates that the level of increase in shootings has gone up by 450% since the start of this year. But that really doesn't tell the real story, because the actual numbers look low, from 2 to 11. But, Mr. Speaker, when as MP I am awakened at night by constituents to say that they have been for hours cowering in fear because of constant bombardment of gunfire, I think I have to alert this House to that situation. You know, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to share with you just a few comments that I have received over the last couple of nights on my telephone. On Saturday night into morning at 1:04 a.m., a resident sent me a text, MP, a pure gunshot afire. Later on in that day, in the morning, 7:11, good morning, MP. It's so unbearable at night with the shots firing between men from in and outside of the community. My God, it's getting out of control. And again, good morning, Sir MP. Shots firing like crazy here. Sorry to be texting you this early, which was 2:37 a.m. I'm like on the floor now. The pebbles from the shots falling on my house top. And finally, just by way of mentioning some of the actual texts that I received, sir, something needs to be established, even if it is just to have a buffer zone on both roads, because I speak for everyone when I say I'm scared, very scared. We need something to kind of die down this tension. Another sleepless night again. That was at 3:33 a.m. Mr. Speaker, recently I've had the good fortune of engaging more and more with our police in the area, and I am convinced, Mr. Speaker, that there is need for greater support to our police. First of all, let me take this opportunity to condemn what has happened, what is happening, to condemn the gunmen, to condemn the shooters, because they are presiding over a reign of terror in the place, especially in the Rockford community now. Mr. Speaker, there was a time when, as MP, you would want to jump in to try and see how quickly you can assist in bringing peace. But, you know, I have stopped playing that role, because it is one thing to achieve peace, but it's another thing to achieve justice. And in many instances, when you try to achieve peace, you put a lull on the situation, but people are still hurting from the killings that took place prior to that, and people bear these malices for decades. And so I am firmly of the view that the citizens, including myself as MP, must support the police fully, must pass information to the police fully, and must bring those persons who are involved to book. Absolutely crucial. But, Mr. Speaker, I also have to ask for special attention, because recently the police advised me that they aren't able to do the active community policing because many of the persons inside there now, they don't know. They are people who have migrated from as far as Montego Bay and are creating havoc in my constituency. So, Mr. Speaker, I know you have limited the time that I have, which is fair enough, but I think it is important for me to bring this matter to national attention and to ask, because the police are in need of additional resources. And I'm asking, by way of this motion, to bring to the attention of the House, to ask for greater support from the constituents, but in particular, to see how the state can provide additional resources. They do need military personnel to augment the police, and they do need equipment to augment the work that the officers are tirelessly performing in the constituency. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
Members.
Mr. Speaker.
Members, before you proceed, let me advise you, there are going to be 3 members speaking. If 2 come from this side, I expect 2 from this side and 1 from this side for 3 minutes. I have allowed you to go 5 because you are the presenter. Mr. Warmington.
Mr. Speaker,
3 minutes.
I wish to sympathize with the situation affecting the member from East Kingston and Port Royal. But quite alarm or concern, he said something about a buffer zone. That's something about buffer zone, where there's from buffer zone in the constituency.
Yes.
Anyhow, before I go further, the motion for adjournment, the requirement is that issue supposed to be urgent national importance.
Yes.
Not really an issue that's of important constituency as such. National. That's what the standing order tells me. But I sympathize with the member anyhow. But I sympathize with him in that respect. What I wish to say is that, unfortunately for him, is that constituency, among others in Kingston and St. Andrews, seem to have that problem.
Yes, like West Rural, West Central as well.
And what I realize is that the issue is maybe the political representative don't really have the know-how or whatever to control those stuff, but I don't see it happening in some other constituencies. That's why I said some constituencies in Kingston and St. Andrew. I mentioned, I didn't want to call a name, but like yours and for the member beside you. You see? So the issue is...
Order, please. Proceed, Mr. Warmington.
So the issue is that, and that constituency doesn't have a political division, a divide, whereby you could say that is a GLP fighting the PMP. That constituency is controlled totally by one party. It's a party that has not ever been won except in 1980 by a GLP member, a candidate. So it means that if you look at the voting pattern in the constituency, it is total PNP. Therefore, what you have is PNP fighting PNP. And with a PNP member of parliament, you should control it.
I must control it. Utter nonsense.
There are no GLP gang in that constituency. They're all PNP gangs. So what I'm saying here, we should never allow the creation of any gang from one party to the other, particularly when the seat is controlled by one party. Should never encourage and allow gangs to be developed.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker. And I take very strong exception to the member misleading the parliament about how gangs are formed and who husband them. I can say without any fear of contradiction that I never and would never support political gangs of any kind in my constituency.
Mr. Warmington, you have 50 minutes, 50 seconds more.
There is no gang in Southwest St. Catherine because I've never encouraged it. There has never been a gang in Southwest St. Catherine because I've never encouraged it. The problem is that people encourage gang to fester and develop, and it's an asset to them during election. And after election, when they turn loose, they make noise about it. What needs to be done is that all persons, whether they are member of parliament, whoever you are, turn in the gang and the gang members, because most of you know who the gang members are. So turn them in and don't ask parliament to help you after you use them during election and after that.
Order, please. May I advise Mr. Jackson is going to speak He has 3 minutes, and the House will be finished at that.
All the mics on the opposition side have been turned off. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My remarks will be brief. But before I proceed to give my support to my colleague from the East Kingston and Port Royal constituency, I want to outrightly reject the assertions by the member from Southwest St. Catherine. It is unfortunate. Mr. Speaker, the police report tells you that most of the murders in Jamaica are being committed by gangs. The highest crime area in Jamaica has been Montego Bay. Is he asserting that the members of parliament in that parish is responsible for the gangs that are committing the murders in that constituency? That is the inference he's making. It's irresponsible, Mr. Speaker, and he should withdraw that remark. Mr. Speaker.
Members.
Criminals must be treated as criminals, regardless of whichever political party that they may give support to. The people who are being murdered and the people who are living in fear daily is irrespective of political persuasion. And when a member of the government can make that assertion, I consider it very unfortunate. Mr. Speaker, the problem, yes, it touched me, yes. Mr. Speaker, the problem that my colleague from East Kingston referred to is just a synopsis. Over the past 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, there are 16 murders that have been committed. 16 murders. And in the most part, it is like nothing happened. Regrettably, Mr. Speaker, the increasing levels of murder have now become almost normal, and the people are regrettably becoming almost numb to the high levels of murders. And in my own inquiry in many of the police divisions, they face some basic challenges. Equipment. In the case of Clarendon, vehicles by numbers are adequate but functional, they are not. And therefore the police ability and capacity to do the work is significantly compromised. And therefore I want to give support to my colleague in calling on the government to make the requisite resources available to the police that they can do a better job than they are able to do. I am convinced that they are up to the task, but the government must give them the support that they need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, that's it. The motion is that the House be adjourned until next week, Tuesday. Let me just advise, under the present resolution, page 7, item 11, clearly states, and I ask all members to read and be aware of, no more than one motion on the point of adjournment. No more than 3 members may be allowed to speak, and not exceeding 3 minutes. Any further than that, it is the speaker who is weak, and I am not weak. I have seen that the Minister of National Security would like to give some assurance to the member. And I am going to allow the Minister, if you so desire, to give you for 2 minutes, and the House will adjourn after that. The House will adjourn. If you don't need it, I won't. Minister, National Security.
Never spoke on the motion.
Yes.
Order, please.
That Speaker, just to say that the issue of crime is of national importance. It's a priority for this government, and the question of resources is not a new issue. this government is committed to providing the police in particular and support the army with the required resources. The budget this year was $21 billion, the single largest capital vote in this budget, and for the first time in the history of the police force, 10 times whatever, anytime. We have to go through a procurement process in terms of motor vehicles. We have in fact sent out the RFP already. For the first time in a very long time, a ministry could put out the RFP, and we expect the response to come by the middle of July, so vehicles can come in this year on a structured way. Last year we procured some 400 vehicles. This we expected about 500, but we are doing it in an ordered way, and it is an RFP for new vehicles with required service contracts and the whole reorganization in that area. We are taking steps to ensure that the police is fully resourced, but even with the full resources in any one year, it takes a little time for that to get through the system. I just want to assure the member we are aware of the challenges he faces there, as well as other areas that are faced with serious challenges. We are fully aware. The Commissioner is making some operational changes, but we are looking at what can be done both in his area and in the two members onto my right from the corporate area, where the current spate of crime has really gone way above what is any kind of tolerable levels nationally, Clarendon and the corporate area.
The motion is that the House be now adjourned until next Tuesday at 2 o'clock.
Mr. Speaker, the rules governing how debate is conducted is pretty clear. They are pretty clear. Having raised the motion and the members have participated, it is only fair that I close on the motion.
Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Paulwell, as a senior parliamentarian, one who I think could study the standing order, there is no provision for that. I therefore move that the House be adjourned until next week, Tuesday, at 2 p.m. Those in favor? Those against? This House now stands adjourned until next Tuesday.